I'm Asger, you can ask me anything. Danny Albee over on SoMe asked me, what is so evolutionarily advantageous about exhibiting life? I actually asked him to elaborate a little bit about it. So he also asked, why isn't everything like boulders or rocks? And why is it important to show life? So the way I see it, he's really asking me about why does evolution seem to favor living things as opposed to inanimate things? This is a really great question, and it actually challenged my knowledge about evolution, even though that's probably one of the areas that I know most about. And I actually spent about a week sort of having this question in the back of my mind, and it wasn't until a few days ago where I found some algae in a water filtration system we have in our kitchen. And these algae just keep appearing in the main tank. I ended up reading about algae and sort of I realized I didn't have a very good understanding of what they are. So, but they're actually a perfect example of how we can understand this. But let's just return to the main question. What is so evolutionarily advantageous about exhibiting life? Well, so first of all, there's an underlying assumption here that it is evolutionarily advantageous. But again, we need to clear up our definitions and concepts here. I mean, usually when we talk about evolution, we only do so in a context of living things. But that doesn't mean that we can't compare it to dead things. And the reason why that is of course that we tend to explain evolution in using terms and concepts that sort of attribute a will to it being evolution here. But of course, as most of you will probably know, that's really only sort of a metaphorical way to understand it. There is no intention behind it per se, but it sure seems like it. I mean, if you watch some nature show about a bird, the narrator will sometimes say stuff like, yes, the albatross developed this impressive wingspan so that it could insert some ability it has. But that's not true. That's really not, it's not a correct way of talking about it. It is a useful way to talk about it in order to understand it and to just have conversations about it. But it is really not true. No living creature or dead creature for that matter develops a capability because of any innate desire it has or out of practicality. So take a cat. I don't know if you can see Nina lying around here in the background. I've actually thought about this many times. So cat litters, I don't know how many kittens cats get on average, but I do know that they get a lot. So twins in humans is pretty rare, and usually in the vast majority of cases, humans just have one baby at a time. But cats have so many. Why is that? It's because cats really aren't that great at surviving. So it's a huge evolutionary advantage to just have a large quantity of offspring, because that increases the likelihood of the genetic code being passed on. But again, we're sort of, in this example, attributing an intention to this process. But that intention is not there. So let's use this cat as an example, and we can start going smaller, and then eventually end out talking about dead stuff, such as rocks and mountains. So let's go back, say, 500,000 years. So I don't know any details about the ancestors of cats, but let's just assume that 500,000 years ago there was a creature that sort of looked like Nina does right now. So some members of this species back then would have 1 or 2 kittens every time they gave birth, and other members would have, let's say, 2 or 3, just to make it really simple. Now, because cats are very fragile, they're not that smart. I mean, they're fast, and they have certain abilities that are unique and make them good at surviving, but they are also kind of stupid in other ways. They take many chances, and they don't really have an understanding, at least in my experience, about what dangers are out there. I mean, this area, for instance, is filled with predators. I mean, almost everybody who lets their cats run free here in the Santa Monica Mountains lose their cat at some point. We have snakes, all types of snakes. We have giant spiders. We have eagles and hawks and other flying predators. We have coyotes, mountain lions, bobcats. I mean, there's all sort of wildlife here. We would just love to consume a cat or kill it for sports, maybe in some cases. So it's really no wonder that if we compare two specific cats in the ancient cat past, that the one with a genetic disposition to have more kittens in each litter are the ones that were favored over time by evolution. Not because of some intention, but simply because, let's just assume here, again, this is speculation, let's just assume that 90% of cats in the wild die before they have a chance to produce offspring. That means that if you're a cat that doesn't have, on average, at least 10 kittens in your lifetime, your genetic code won't be passed on. And if you have 20 or 30 or 40, you will over time win that lottery. And the same thing goes for much simpler organisms, such as algae. So algae, very simple creatures, most of which live from photosynthesis. Not all of them. Some of them are parasites. Some of them can only live on other plants. Now, a way of understanding them, sort of, is to compare them to plants. There are plants without roots, without leaves, without a core structure. They're sort of like just decentralized, tiny biological entities that, in most cases, live from sunlight. And they're sort of one step up from bacteria, but they're actually not that different from bacteria. So now we're arriving at a point where we can answer this question. So let's just say, and of course, I don't want to get into the whole debate about how life may have arisen. We consist of physical components, little atoms, and if we just take a simple atom and remove it from my body, I mean, does that single atom, is it alive? I mean, it's only really alive because it's integrated in the structure that we agree to call me. So let's just rewind the evolutionary and geological clock. Let's go back tens of millions of years. So let's just say we have this soup of atoms, various types of atoms lying around right here. Some of that soup are hit by sunlight. Some of it is in the shadow. It just so happens that because of the chemical composition of the atoms, the ones that are hit by sunlight are able to absorb it as energy, making them multiply. This is just a chemical reaction at this point. The ones that are in shade do not multiply. And by now, you probably see where I'm going with this. So let's say the sun disappears, comes back the next day, and now the part of this imagined soup that had already multiplied will now be even more capable of multiplying, assuming that it just has the right chemical composition to be able to absorb energy from sunlight. But there are other energy absorption processes. I'm not that well versed in biology, to be honest with you, but there are many different ways that we can absorb energy from our environment. I shouldn't say we, that stuff can absorb energy from its environment. And sunlight is obviously just one of them. But now we're starting to see how this process could be reinforced over time. So that's sort of an explanation. But we probably should try to challenge just a little bit the underlying assumption in the original question here. What is so evolutionarily advantageous about exhibiting life? So the assumption here is, of course, that it is advantageous. But that could be described as a way we interpret it, because we're alive, so it seems better to be alive than to be dead. I mean, that's certainly how it feels to me. But if we look around in the world, I think behind me over there, you can see a mountaintop. If the criterion for being successful is just being there, continued existence, that mountaintop is doing pretty well, isn't it? Why is it important to show life? My answer to that would be, it's not. There's no intention in this. It's really just a matter of things evolving in some process, and at some point the environment favors the characteristics that we find here and not the ones we find here, we're making this population die off, and incidentally just favoring this one over here. That is evolution. But again, we're really at the very core of what evolution is here. And I think what your question, Danny, sheds some light on here is really something. I mean, I've heard Richard Dawkins and a few other people talk about it in the past, that we're actually sort of talking about evolution we're using a vocabulary that isn't correct, but it's just helpful to use. It's helpful to think about my DNA code as having an intention to copy itself, but it actually doesn't. And that's actually very, very important. And I actually sometimes suspect that the scientific community does itself a disservice about talking about things in this way, because it's actually an important point that it's not that my genetic code wants to reproduce itself. And I find myself walking straight in this pitfall every now and then, even to this date. But my genetic code doesn't care about anything. It has no intention, it has no will. If it doesn't manage to replicate, it won't be around so that we can study it in the future. So in a sense, evolution is really a retrospective process. We can only study it by looking at the stuff that has already happened. So I hope this answers your question. And again, you can ask me absolutely anything, and I'm gonna do my best to answer it. It doesn't have to be science related. That's actually one of the points I'm hoping to be able to show with this channel, is that, I've had talks with people who dropped out of elementary school about quantum physics. As long as both parties agree to understand that they both have a limited understanding, and also to accept that we may not be using the correct, quote-unquote, vocabulary from any scientific point of view, we can actually pretty much talk about anything, which is one of the reasons that's really one of the things I'm hoping to be able to show the world by growing this channel. And I enjoy talking about stuff that I don't know anything about, or don't have an extensive knowledge on, at the very least. Because, I think we can all do that. But I also think we can all do so in a faulty manner and in a more productive manner. So, feel free to ask me anything. And thank you so much for listening to this video. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one. Cheers.